and welcome to the Center for Sustainable Materials Chemistry's webinar on Professional Development, Resume Building, Part 1. My name is Blake Hammond, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Arlene Tate from Washington University in St. Louis. This webinar is our first installment in this new series of webinars on professional development. This webinar is hosted by the CSMC's Student Council for Innovation, which is a student and postdoc-led team within the center. We created this webinar series to aid graduate students and postdoctoral associates in developing their professional skill sets. To begin with today's webinar, I want to first go through our format. I'm going to first begin with two short introductions for myself and Arlene. Arlene is then going to give us a quick 20-minute presentation on resume building. I'll then open up the webinar to a live question and answers with the audience. At this time, audience, you'll be allowed to post questions to the questions dialog box that's seen in your control panel. And then as we approach the end of the webinar, our guest speaker will summarize key points and provide us with a take-home message. So to begin with our introductions, we're joined by Arlene Tate from the Career Center at Washington University Washington University in St. Louis, and myself. I'm also a PhD candidate at Washington University in St. Louis and a member of the Center for Sustainable Materials Chemistry. To introduce myself, my name is Blake Hammond. I am a fourth-year graduate student in the Department of Chemistry at Washington University, and I am working with Sophia Hayes in the Department of Chemistry, using solid state NMR to look at inorganic metal oxide clusters and their corresponding thin films, which are used for device application. I received my bachelor's degree from Blackburn College in 2010, and I completed a master's in organic chemistry from Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville. Our guest speaker, Dr. Arlene Tate, is currently the Assistant Director for the Career Development Center at Washington University. Dr. Tate has 2 decades of experience working as a tenured faculty member, Dean of Faculty, and Provost, working as a senior executive of 2 Fortune 100 companies, including Mallinckrodt and United Healthcare. Arlene has served doctoral students and postdoctoral associates for the last decade. She has received local and national media attention and awards for both her professional and civic leadership. Her personal experience as a successful job seeker and hiring manager in both academic and corporate venues adds proven strategies to her career guidance, augmented with a wealth of networking success and well-placed contacts. Arlene, the floor is yours. I'll let you take over.
Thank you, and thanks for joining us today. I want to make certain that you know that the purpose, we want to talk about what a resume is, and perhaps a bit about how it differs from a CV, but what I'd like to point out to begin with is that the purpose of a resume is to be your sales brochure. When you're looking for a position, you're essentially in a sales mode where you're trying to match your skills to what you perceive or what you know is needed. And the resume is not a description, a job description of the things you've done, but rather it is a list of your accomplishments, and if some of those accomplishments are knowing how to do certain kinds of protocols, that's an accomplishment, but it's a list of your bragging points, basically, that are tailored to make you interesting to your target audience, in other words, the hiring managers. And if I use that concept, hiring manager, which you may have heard before, it is not human resources. The hiring manager is the person that has the budget that hires you. So in the case of while you're a student or a postdoc, it would be your PI. and then your PI's bosses. If we look at, let's see, I'm not able to advance. Oh, there we go. So your resume has to be targeted to the audience that you're expecting to or hoping to get a job from. And it answers the question, why should we hire you? And it's not a list, as I said, of job descriptions, but a display of your accomplishments. You need to remember that even though a cover letter is important, generally people will go to the resume first because it's a lot more accessible, because it's generally somewhat of an outline kind of format. It's phrases as opposed to complete sentences. And generally people will only look at your resume for a maximum of 30 seconds, oftentimes less than that. Also understand that if you apply for jobs online, only 20% of the jobs that new employees in the U.S. secured in the last 5 years were advertised. So networking, which you'll have another webinar on in the future, is an extraordinarily important skill to learn. But in order to network, you need to have some kind of brochure or some kind of piece that you hand out, and that would be your resume. As you can see, there's only a difference in the meanings of what a resume and a curriculum vitae are, with a resume being a summary. Curriculum vitae in the U.S. generally is something used in mostly in academic settings. If you, however, are going abroad, the CV is what you're often asked for. But in both cases, they should both accomplish the same purpose, which is to sell or advertise or promote the things that you can do that would be an answer to a need for the prospective employer. So remember, it is your advertising piece. So I saw a resume this morning and someone just had the names of her PIs as the lead statements in each section, but it's not about her PI, it's about her. And so in case, even with your degree, it's a PhD in organic chemistry from Washington University in St. Louis, not Washington University in St. Louis, PhD in organic chemistry. If you have the resume template that I gave you, or if not, you can see on this slide, the top two pieces are the most important pieces. I know you've heard or read that a business resume needs to be just one page, but the reason for that is so that we don't have extraneous kinds of information. And we accomplish the same purpose. A PhD should not be able to do a one-page resume. You should, at least if you have publications, have some publications listed. So we accomplish the same purpose by using a professional resume format, which is what you see, the professional profile at the top and highlights. These are definitely targeted to your audience. The professional profile or the professional summary of qualifications generally answers the question that you might be asked, which would be your elevator speech. Tell me about yourself. That tell me about yourself you answer from the perspective of the interest of the audience. So the person that you're speaking with, if it was the president of U.S. Steel, if there's still that company, you would be talking about the things that you know about steel. You would mention yourself as a PhD with an emphasis in, and the emphasis would be from all those things that you might pick. They would be the emphases that you think would be most interesting to the prospective employer or hiring manager. The highlight section then gives you further opportunity to top load the most important kinds of takeaways that you want your reader to have. So this is where, with headlines essentially, like an abstract, you're able to put in some special points, as you might see in the, I don't know if you can see in the slide, but definitely in the template you can see 2 Nature and 4 Science first author publications. I'm sure you all can identify with that. And rather than mentioning the bibliographic notation for those right now. That's going to be something later. But if I don't read any further in the resume, if all I read is the professional profile and the highlights, I'm already going to know all the things that you want me to find out, like not having to go to the 4th page to see your Nobel Prize. It would be top-loaded, and I can read then. If I read for 15 to 30 seconds and I'm not interested, I'm not going to read any further in the resume, so the resume has failed. If I read and it's very interesting in the top 2 sections, I can cheat and not read any further because I already know that I want to take this to the next step, which would be to invite you for an interview, probably a phone interview, but a screening interview anyway, but you've made it past the first step. So I'm not able to advance again. Oh, thank you. Now, if you put the most important things at the top, you top-load the most important things, then the next section should be whatever you think would be, again, most important. If you're a recently minted PhD or you're finishing a postdoc, chances are your degrees are going to be the next section. However, if you've had a PhD for a long time, you have a lot of experience, it may be your experience section that is next. If indeed you're going for a position such as this mentions, if you were going for a teaching position or a position in academia that was primarily teaching, then you would have the teaching section before a research section. So in other words, you strategically place the things in your resume that you think are going to be of greatest importance to the reader for that person's interest in you. You don't use complete sentences, but generally you're going to want to try to use action verbs. And you don't use I nor we. You just say, first knock out Cargi protein. By the way, if you read the template, you're going to say this person isn't a scientist. It reads kind of like Mad Magazine. So since you're scientists, you may enjoy reading the template because I've made up science, mostly because the template is to show you where you place things. So we say, created a new material for such and such, designed a new protocol. As you see, starting with verbs, and if you have to use a thesaurus for help, do it, because I find for myself I get stuck on one word and keep using the same one, design, 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 created, created. So again, stress accomplishments, and even if your research isn't done, so let's say you're working on your dissertation, it's not done, but you do have some milestones that you could show. Created a new protocol for discovering what you're looking for, whatever it might be. Found a new computational method for designing something, and then later, of course, you don't want to be scooped, so later you'll give more information about your findings when your dissertation is done or the research that you're working on is done. Can't advance again, please. Instead of having, June 1982 to September 1993 as dates for something, just use year to year. It is not necessary to say I was an undergrad from 2006 to 2010. All that's important is the graduation date. So in that case, it would be 2010. If you worked somewhere for a summer, it was 2012, then just use 2012. If you worked on a particular research project from 2010 to 2012, the months again aren't important. References and the names of your mentors are not important if you're doing a business resume unless those people are significant in the field that you're going into. So assuming you're in materials science and going into sustainable kinds of industries, sustainable sciences industries, it's quite possible that your PIs are known by those industries. So using their names might work. Remember, this is a sales brochure, so you use what is helpful to you. I can't advance again, please. A letter of introduction I'm not going to cover at length now, but you should know that it introduces your CV. For those of you for whom English may not be your first language, it's a writing sample, and it gives you an opportunity to make a connection with the hiring manager. But remember, it may not be read. If you can't capture their attention in the first two sections of the resume, then there's no reason for me to spend time or the hiring manager to spend time reading the cover letter. So if you look, then you can see the sample resume where we have the professional summary, so the professional profile, which hits the high points, or what in advertising you would call, the hooks, the advertising hooks. And it tells what you're able to do, and again, remembering it's from the perspective of the individual that you're addressing. And then, as I mentioned, the highlights are just an abbreviated way of putting things in that you think are going to add value, or they're high points from the rest of the CV. When I left academe for the first time and went to, or for the only time so far, where I had been a provost and went to industry, and when I went to Mallinckrodt, once I got there, SIU Edwardsville called and asked if I would submit for their Dean of Faculty. And I really was happy in industry, but because I was asked directly, I thought I should submit. But then I realized that SIU Edwardsville, at that point at least, had a unionized faculty. And because I had not been in a faculty union nor led one, I figured there was no point in spending the time on creating the resume because I was out before the count. However, I remembered that when I was 15 years old, I was in the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, an IBEW. And so I was able to use a bullet point, and it shows you how significant an insignificant thing may be. I was able to put a bullet point that said former union member. And I was relatively certain they wouldn't go to the fourth page of my resume and find out that it was the IBEW, but would read it from their perspective and their level of interest and think that it had been a faculty union. For many of you, the next section will be the education, and then after that, you'll have the research experience. So if you're a postdoc, you may have postdoc, and then you talk about what the topic is, which is oftentimes the title of a journal article that you've written, and then you talk about what you did in there. You discovered something, you designed something, you created something. First, to create this. So it's not just the title that you've written, and many people would do, they believe that all they need is to list their bibliography, but in fact, you need to, I could have written the same things, though I'm not a materials chemist. Because I wouldn't have discovered anything or designed anything, but you have, and so that's the important things to add. And so you can see, and so forth, how you would add the subsequent experiences. And then if you've done something else that you think might add value, the first person that I designed this resume with was going for, he's a biochemist, and he was going for a position as a PI. Computational biology and computational chemistry was becoming large at the time, and because he had experience writing code when he needed to make money between his graduate degrees, we thought just alluding to the fact that he knew how to do that might give some credibility to the fact that he could lead a group of people who might be in the computational areas. Awards, are interesting if they're relevant, but if you only got them when you were an undergrad, then maybe you want to leave the section up because you don't want someone to think that you fizzled once you became a graduate student or a postdoc. Memberships, not all that significant unless it is a significant organization, or particularly if you held a position. Publications, as you see, if you look at this, you can see there's publications, there's in preparation, abstracts. You've seen that in in CVs. But really for a non-academic resume, I would consolidate and have publications and presentations, so you can have some talks and some publications, or in fact you could go one step further and call it relevant publications and presentations, and then only put the things in that you want, that you think are significant. So those several Science and Nature first author papers would be in there for sure. Then at the end you can see we have the unlisted piece, where which implies that there are plenty of other publications and presentations that you didn't mention. So the bottom there where it says unlisted numerous graduate and postgraduate presentations, including journal clubs, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I think the most important thing is to remember, again, this is a sales brochure. It's intended to get you to the next step. It isn't a tell-all, so you're not. It's not a full disclosure document. You tell what you need to tell. You don't tell lies, but you also make sure that what you're telling is what the readers will find most interesting. So people will come to me and say, I need one CV and one resume. You need one for every hiring manager that you're sending to, and one for every position that you're looking for. So they may not vary all that much, but they all need to be carefully constructed so that they are designed especially for the target audience, the organization, and particularly the person for whom you believe you will be working. So I believe I have hit the 20-minute mark. I'm not sure.
I believe so. So
I'll be happy to.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Arlene.
I was just going to say I'll be happy to take any questions.
Great. Thanks, Arlene. So at this time, we'll open up the floor for a live Q&A with the audience. I'm already getting some questions coming in. If you're chiming in a little late, if you look at your control panel, you'll see a questions dialog box. If you have any questions that you would like to ask Arlene, please post your questions there, and I'll try to try to ask Arlene as many questions as possible in our allotted time period. And also, Arlene made mention of a document that you can download. In your control panel, you should see a tab that says Handouts. Arlene has made this this handout available to you for download, so you can have for future reference. Arlene, one of the first questions that we had come in was, what should you keep in mind when fashioning a resume for distributing to employers during a career fair?
That's a good question, because you're generally only going to have one resume that you take with you. Unless, generally when you go to a career fair, you have particular employers that you're interested in. And if I were fashioning one for a career fair for which I had one or two or three particularly interesting employers, I would make certain that my resume, either I had one for each of those, and perhaps the same sort of the resume that I gave to the others. But it's difficult when you're asked, let's say when we went to the recent Bio 2015 convention that we go to every year, it's difficult when they have a job fair there and you're supposed to submit in advance. So it's a good question. You just have to try to target what you think is going to be most important to the majority of the readers, and certainly what's most important for you to be hired on the basis of. So, I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Arlene. Also, to add something to that, at least at some universities, job fairs typically send out an email a week or a couple of days in advance that let you know which companies are present. So I would look for those emails as well. Arlene, our next question is, what would be your recommendation for an older person re-entering the job force who's worried about potential or perceived disqualification due to age?
Well, so being an older person, I can identify with that. And in fact, when I mentioned the IBEW, like I said, I was 15 years old. If I put the date on that particular resume, they would have thought 20 years ago I was 125 years old. First of all, if you leave dates off, it's difficult for you to, most readers see through that and believe that you must be very old. Sometimes it makes you seem older than you really are. And maybe you're not as old as you think in the eyes of the readers. But you don't want to reach back to what you did as an undergrad or what you did in 1966 or anything that's so far back that, first of all, your science is probably old, but second of all, it's just too far. It's not a relevant experience. And that's why I didn't mention, but I should have, I just took for granted, that you need to, when you put your experiences in, you put them in reverse chronology. So people want to know, what have you done lately? So the things that you've done lately, if they're not directly relevant, if you had a couple of careers as I have, a corporate and then an academic and now an academic again, you may say relevant experience, just as we did with the publication. So relevant experience, and mention those things. Sometimes you may need to go to a functional resume. But generally, if you've done a good job with the top pieces, where you say PhD or master's or graduate, materials chemist with experience and expertise in such and such and such and such, and then your highlights, 4 patents, 3 of this, 5 of that, whatever, those don't have dates on them. And so you can advertise what you think are the high points, and they may not read any further to see the dates. But try not to reach way far back so that because it's not relevant. If you did something 20 years ago, they may not have an interest in that anyway, and it just adds clutter to the resume.
Okay, thanks, Arlene. And the next question is about the length of the resume. This particular person asked or stated that it is usually advised to keep it to 2 pages at most. Would you agree with that?
No. I think that unless you have a great number, a lot of experience and a great number of publications, you probably can do it in 2 pages. But remember, if I'm only going to read the top third of the first page, it doesn't make much difference how much is behind there. And when I get to the back pages, that will be where your list of publications and talks are. And what I'll do by the time I get to that, if I read them at all, will be to look for Nature, Science, or the relevant publications in sustainable materials chemistry, and the highest impact publications. And then I'll also look to see how many of those were you first author on, which means that bolding your name when you're a first author is an important piece. Of course, you have to bold it all the way through, but hopefully that points up the first authorships. So 2 pages, yes, you never want to pad it. You want to make sure that everything that you say is important. But if it goes beyond 2 because you're a postdoc and have done a lot of research, it's okay. I'm probably only going to read the front page anyway.
Okay, thank you. Our next question comes to us and states, what's the best way to display/report gaps in work history?
Well, it depends on what you were doing in between. If you're female, gaps are expected for maternity leaves, even though they may not have been. If you're a male, sometimes people are suspicious. Remember that experience also includes, let's say, being on a mission or taking on a volunteer task or a community or holding an office. So doing other things in the community for which you may not be paid also count. So if those are what the gaps entailed, then perhaps as part of your other experience, you can list those, or you can, if you feel that they're relevant, their leadership or other sorts of things, you can integrate them into the list of experience, and rather than having research experience, you'll just have a list called professional experience. But many people have gaps, but you had to have been doing something in between. And if it was something unfortunate, like spending time in jail, which I hope is not true of any of you, you probably were reading a lot of books, so you'll have some fillers. I wouldn't be really concerned about that. People are not going to look so closely at that. But if you apply for things online, so once you get to the networking session, it's important to know that that's how you're going to get hired. But if you apply for things online, then it becomes much more obvious because you're filling out a chronology that includes everything, whereas a resume doesn't have to.
Okay. Thanks, Arlene. Our next question is, how important is it to show that you can work as part of a team with peers, not just with mentors? And how might you include that in a resume?
Well, you'll talk about being part of the Center for Sustainable Materials Chemistry, which leads me to believe that you are collaborating. And so mentioning as perhaps a bullet point, collaborated with X number of schools or laboratories on such and such a project as part of the Center for Sustainable Materials Chemistry, the collaboration itself indicates that you are working with others. Do not do what you see sometimes on resumes where they ask, if you look at an ad that says we're looking for team players who are bright and happy and friends to others and whatever, don't put that in your resume. You want to prove things empirically. So you mentioned collaborated, served as team leader, did this, led groups of undergrads on such and such. That shows, it's the things that you did that show that you were a team player.
Okay. Actually, so one of my questions is, what about like synergistic activities such as looking at broader impacts, such as going out and working at say, a science fair as a judge?
Yeah, that's great.
So would you include that as like a volunteer experience or as a bullet point?
I have a particular prejudice against calling certain things volunteer. I think just because you don't get paid doesn't mean that it's not valid experience. So it depends on the length and level of the experience, but if it was something that took a good deal of time, it might be just listed as part of your professional experience. Or it could be community outreach as a separate section. So community outreach or leadership in community outreach positions. So let's say you served on the graduate senate or the graduate student senate or graduate council, or you're part of a young scientist program. All of those things could be part of a section that's considered leadership and community outreach or community service, or leadership and service.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, are teaching experiences insignificant, and should we ignore that from the CV when we apply for a postdoc position?
For postdoc positions, I think the teaching is important because generally a postdoc will have, depending upon the facility that you're in, some places don't have undergrads, but if you have undergrads and certainly graduate students, the postdoc is probably going to be a leader, which means you need to be a mentor. So mentoring and teaching positions, I think, are an important piece. They're also important for corporate kinds of positions because it shows that you can be a team lead and facilitate the learning of the people who work for you. So I think they are important. And for a postdoc position, I think they are as well. But to enumerate every course that, taught Chemistry 101, fall semester, taught Chemistry 101, spring semester, taught chemistry, to enumerate all of that is not important. But to say, 3 semesters of teaching chemistry, 4 semesters of teaching material science, and so on, I think that makes some sense, but not to elongate that piece. And again, it shows that you can work with others, you can teach and lead.
Okay, great. Our next question is, should education or professional experience be highlighted when a PhD is earned mid-career?
You mean, I think that it's, I guess you could put that, you could use it as a highlight, as long as in addition to that highlight you have accomplishments. So I think it's very interesting to earn a PhD mid-career. I kind of did that. I was 10 years away from my bachelor's when I went back to school, and I was on a radio show, and I remember there was a call-in, and the person said and then another called in the same and said they were very impressed with people who went back to school to further their education, because it meant that they were willing to learn and to adapt and to become more and more valuable. So I think I would probably, if I were doing that, I probably would use as one of my highlights recently earned PhD, but make sure there are other highlights as well.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, when targeting employers using using social media such as LinkedIn, is brevity still an important factor since the profile can be any length?
So you're talking, well, I can't ask, I guess. So if you're talking about the profile that you put into your LinkedIn profile, that's a toughie unless you know exactly whom you're targeting, because people will read your LinkedIn profile. But if you put something in your profile that excludes certain employers' interests, then you've kind of missed the boat. So those profiles are very tricky things to write. But if you know exactly who you're targeting, then make your profile look like that. Brevity is important because, again, people aren't going to be reading. It's a resume, basically, a social media resume, and people don't want to read a long one. So make sure that you can have all the important points top-loaded and leave off any of the extraneous pieces.
Okay. My next question is, do you include GPA in your education background? Is that required? Is it good to put there, or would you just leave it off altogether?
There's really no reason. If you're working on a PhD or a postdoc, then we know you had to have done well as an undergrad. If you're completing a graduate degree, there's not much range of grades that you can get. So you know. And so it's for the most part not relevant. If you're going for a position, however, where they use metrics as one way of paring down the group of applicants, such as if you're going for management consulting like McKinsey and Bain and the BCG, they want you to put in your GPA because they use that metric as well as TOEFL scores and you know, ACT scores, etc., and they make some sort of an algorithm and decide this is how we're going to narrow down the field. I think that's not relevant because we know grades are so arbitrary, and it's hard from one school to another and even one professor to another to really find much reliability. So generally, I say no, unless they're asked for.
Okay.
They don't add value because at your levels, you're expected to have stellar grades.
Okay.
By the same token, that question brings up another point, and that is, as you're talking about, you know, when you read ads and you look for jobs via ads, they're generally looking for someone who's going to work for the PhD, not a PhD, even though they say a PhD would be desirable. So they'll ask for people who can do, you know, mass spec or other sorts of techniques And if your research, so if you're targeting the right person, the head of research, or someone in a level who understands, who is a PhD generally, if your research cannot have been done without those particular skills implicit in the research, you don't need to say that you did this, you did that, you did this. You know, you don't give the recipe because you've given the final product. So again, all these little incidental details take away from the power statements. You know, created this, found that, discovered, created, patented, etc.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is, if you are a recent graduate, should you include relevant coursework that pertains to subjects that the employer is looking for in a prospective employee?
Well, if you're at a non-graduate level, so if you're not a PhD or a postdoc, maybe that might add credibility. If you don't already have some empirical proof that you know how to do the things, let's say you've never used R, you know, for data analysis, but you've recently taken a course in that, then yes, that might add some value. But to go through all of the courses that are somewhat relevant, that would be implicit in materials chemistry degree, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Again, you're reading 20% of the jobs, you're reading the ads, and they're really not generally, a PhD, if that's what you are, is a multifaceted peg, and the ads are for round pegs, and so you can't be expected to, those aren't the things you should be looking for. Of the jobs of which 20% are advertised, of that 20%, only half of them are really viable. The others, they already know who they want because they've met them through networking or mentor to mentor, or you know, there's some relationship, because people would rather hire a known quantity than an unknown. So, so those kinds of things, adding the courses, are again could be superfluous, but I certainly wouldn't be front page information.
Okay. In your slides, excuse me, in your slides, Arlene, you mentioned elevator speeches. I know what an elevator speech is, but could you enlighten our audience? Some may not know what an elevator speech is.
Sure. It's essentially the reason it's called an elevator speech is it's something you should be able to do if you're on an elevator that isn't stuck somewhere from one floor to another with an important person. So the elevator speech is essentially what the top piece, the professional profile of your resume is, where you're standing in the elevator and you're introducing yourself to someone, or you're just introducing yourself to someone in a networking context, and you're spending less than 15 seconds to tell them something about you. So the person says, "Tell me about yourself," and that's the answer. It's the elevator speech. But you design the elevator speech so that you're bringing up points that you know that the person to whom you're speaking would find interesting. And you also want to have some interruptables. So if you're going to an interview and you're using the elevator speech, you put in some significant things that you might like to discuss further, because if you're interrupted, they say, "Tell me more about the Nobel Prize you won," or "Tell me more about how you did this," or "Tell me when you discovered that." So that's the elevator speech. It's the 15-second introduction of self with relevance to the audience that you're speaking to.
Okay, thank you. My next question is, with the internet age, a lot of employers are moving to electronic submission for resumes and CVs. Is there anything you would recommend doing differently between electronic versions and, say, a hard copy?
Well, the hard copy is the best if you can do that. So again, if we were talking about networking, you would be papering all of the places that you're interested in with a hard copy, because that's not going through a computer. The electronic submissions are simple for the employers because with 500 or more applicants for each position that's advertised, there's no one person who's going to want to go through all of those to figure out who is and who is not qualified for the position. I recently was at a meeting with one of the vice presidents of Pfizer, who said that he actually did read through 600 applicants that he had gotten last year for a significant position. And of those, he only found 15% that were at all qualified. And it may have been that 50% were qualified, but they didn't do a good job of their resumes. But if you're submitting online, so electronic submission tells me you're submitting online for those 20%, half of which are viable jobs, and you're submitting online for that, you have to realize that it's a computer that's looking at it. And so that's when they're going to be looking for significant words that have to be relevant to what the ad says, what they're looking for. But then the next person who looks at it, or the first person who looks at it, is usually someone with a degree in humanities who's recently graduated with a bachelor's degree, and this is usually her entry or entree to business, to be in the recruiting office. And so she doesn't understand the significance of the things that you can do. So, I try to suggest avoiding electronic submissions, and certainly if you can send something directly to a person, and the same thing with the cover letter, to a person with that person's name, never to whom it may concern or dear sir or madam, but to that person, then I think you're much further ahead. You want to try to avoid the computer, and if indeed you need visa sponsorship, the computer can be the killer. Even if you have OPT, you're going to, the computer's going to catch you, because it's going to ask, do you need sponsorship immediately? And you say no, and you think, aha, I made it past that. And then it asks, will you need it in 5 years? And then you have to say yes. And now the computer spits you out. So even though you won a Nobel Prize, it's not screening for that. It's screening for other things. So, I don't like electronic submissions. And if you're doing networking, electronic is not good either, because unless it's asked for, no one's going to open up your attachment. So there you have it. Okay. I'm opposed to electronic submissions.
As I am too. I like the old hard copies.
Good for you. You're an old-fashioned guy.
So related to hard copies, what type of paper is best to print your hard copy on? Do you use resume paper or plain paper? Personally, I would probably use the resume paper, but
and you're right. That's what you should use, the resume paper, which used to also be called thesis or dissertation paper. So it's usually a cotton bond. So if you hold it up to the light, you can see it has some thickness to it, but you can see a watermark that may say 25% cotton content. So it has to be a substantive piece of paper, and you can get it at most office supplies stores. So it's a thicker paper, and make sure that your cover letter, that everything is matched. My preference is the bright white. I think that's more professional, but some people will use a more ivory color. Other colors, though, unless you're going into an artistic endeavor, save for later. That's not something you should use for applying for positions or trying to use your resume for networking purposes.
Okay, and your resume paper should match the envelope paper as well. Is that
yes,
correct?
Although it's hard to get, unless you're going to fold the resume, it's hard to get. So the resume paper usually comes, you can get matching envelopes, but they're the business size envelopes. so that you can get the larger, what are those, 12 by 9, 9 by 12 or so envelopes, so you don't have to fold the paper, fold your resume. And you can get them in a white color. And so I would do that so it's not the contrast having like a yellow envelope.
Okay. So is it looked down upon to fold the resume? I've not heard that before.
It's not looked down upon. It's just, you remember that, first of all, first impressions are they last forever. So it looks neater if it's not folded, number one. You don't, in fact, when you put a resume together and you're actually handing it or sending it like that, you don't staple it either. So they're individual pages, which means you should paginate each and put your name on them, except for the first one. You don't put your name on your name will be there. And you don't have to say page 1 on the first one. And if you're pulling this out of a larger envelope, then that heading, the top piece that you're going to see, is the professional profile and highlights. So unless you're not literate in the language that you've written, unless the person's not literate in the language that you've written in, they can't help but have a takeaway from that of the highlights that you want them to know about you. So,
okay.
So folding is okay. It's just that it looks nicer if not.
Okay. Our next question is, if you are out networking at a conference, is it acceptable to hand out your resume to people you talk to, or should you wait to be asked for it?
I believe you should wait to be asked for a couple of reasons. Number one, unless they ask for it, they really don't necessarily want to see it. And so you're handing it to them, and you know that when they're packing to go somewhere, back to home or whatever, that's going to be tossed in the wastebasket. So you're much better in terms of networking to meet somebody and then do a follow-up later with saying, it was so nice to meet you at such and such conference. I was pleased about this that you said, and I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to be on the market soon, and for your information, I am enclosing my resume. So then you send the resume, you send it to their address where it's going to end up in their office as opposed to in their suitcase and perhaps tossed. But if you're asked for it, you always want to take some with you, and again, take them on the good paper. And then I would staple them at a conference because there'll just be too many papers going around.
Sure. Okay, thank you, Arlene. I think we have time for one last question. Do you have any advice on how to network or get your name out there? I know we've brought up conferences here and LinkedIn. Is there any other methods that you would recommend?
Well, you mentioned LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is becoming more and more powerful, I think, so I'm sure that there must be some sustainable materials chemistry LinkedIn group. Is there? Probably. If not...
Yes, there is.
Oh, sure, good. Yes. So,
yes, there is.
Yeah, so, so that certainly is one way to link with people. And, there's a group for everything. So if you have a particular interest like sustainable materials chemistry in Boston, there may be just a group that's called something slightly different that's there, and then you can look in Boston. The other way of networking with people is, basically networking is something that should be a geometric progression. So you hope that you find people that are willing to refer you to other people. And I call that an adopt a mentor kind of program. And to do that, we create a resume that is targeted to the person. Remembering networking goes down, not up, so you go to a high-level person that you can make some connection with because you heard them talk, you heard they were on campus, whatever, and you send them a letter asking for their advice, saying that you're soon going to be finishing your postdoc and be looking for opportunities in materials chemistry, and because they're a leader in that field, you were hopeful they might be willing to suggest people and places that you should be looking for opportunities. And then you have your resume in there, and you say, for your convenience, I have I have enclosed my resume to give you a better idea of my background, to inform your advice should you be willing to give it. And towards that end, I'd be delighted if you call to offer any suggestions. But for your convenience, I will call you in 2 weeks to ask to see if you have any recommendations for me. Okay. So you kind of force a relationship.
Okay, thank you.
Look at your alumni lists as well. Many departments now will keep lists of who graduated when and where they are now.
Okay. We are running low on time now, so I'll take the remaining time to allow Arlene to give us a short take-home message. Arlene, if you could give us a minute or two.
I think I've kind of pounded the message that the resume is a sales brochure. It's a piece that is meant to open doors for you, but not to be the sales piece entirely. It's not the thing that's going to get you inside. It just gets you the door open so that you can then enter and take it to the next step. The resume will only be looked at for a very short time, probably less than 30 seconds. So anything that you want someone to know about you that you think is going to make a difference in whether or not you would get a job or get a position, whatever, have an interest from them, make sure that that's at the top of the resume in a profile and in highlights. If you don't have enough things for highlights, then just have a little bit longer profile. But don't have big blobs of words. How's that for scientific? Blobs of words. Because if I wanted that, I would read your cover letter. So, you know, there's no set format other than making it neat, easy to read, remembering that it's advertising you and that it's about accomplishments and requires follow-up once you've sent it. So, you know, my wishes for you are that you do great resumes, that you have lots of doors open to you, and that you do very well as you're continuing on your career. I think that being a member of this center is already positioning you well to advertise yourselves, and I hope you'll take advantage of that. I guess finally,
thank you, Arlene.
Thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you, Arlene. With the remaining time, I'd like to take this time to thank you, the audience, for joining us today, and our guest panelist, Arlene Cage, for giving us insights in how to prepare an effective resume. I would also like to thank my fellow Student Council for Innovation members, Lauren Fulmer, Zaid Ma, Ryan Frederick, Ryan Manser, Betty Maddox, for helping to prepare today's webinar. For more information about the CSMC and future webinars, please visit us at sustainablematerialschemistry.org and take the opportunity to follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. If you enjoyed today's webinar, we also will have a part 2 on Thursday at the same time, and you can find us on sustainablematerialschemistry.org. We also have today's recording, which will be up on the website, so you can go back and listen to Arlene's presentation and some of the live questions and answers. Thanks again for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.